Okay. Okay, well, I'll get started then. I can see what I'm presenting to hopefully all of you. A bit of background in terms of myself. I work in public health, National Health Service in Scotland is a public agency. And my current area of work is focusing on place and equity and how we practically translate that theory around placemaking and public health into a practical toolkit that anyone can use. And hopefully what I've got to say will illustrate that. In terms of why I'm here today, I'll explain later on in some slides what the connections were to arrive at this point, which is always very interesting in terms of international work and how just one conversation can lead to another, and before you know it, there's a rollout of a program somewhere. So I'll get cracking. Now, I would have to say there's a version of this that takes a day and a half. I haven't got a day and a half to explain this, but what I will cover is just slightly just go through the background of the tool that is a placemaking tool. A little bit about the delivery. Some of the processes we introduced to both govern its application, but also how it broadened out internationally. And then I'll just say a few words around future plans and improvements for the product. So in terms of the why to having a place standard tool in Scotland, well, there's the theoretical origins that we work to. And these are not unique to Scotland. In fact, hopefully they match up with your own thinking in terms of what we mean by place. So it's both the physical environment and the social environment, and it's a quality of place that emerges as a consequence of the relationship between both of those. That's the definition we use to lead our work. The other theory that we apply to lead our thinking is around the causation of health and inequalities. And this is a model developed by my own organisation. And if you read from left to right, the linear way that we think would be that what drives who we are, what drives our health and well-being is very much around the fundamental causes, the big global drivers, what's normal within our societies, the political priorities that exist both at international, regional, national or local levels, and just the whole dimension of equality and power and the ability to influence that. These fundamental causes shape our environments, and those environments then determine what sort of individual experience we can expect to go through on a day-to-day basis, albeit access to education, housing, a whole range of different healthy lifestyles, and just feeling part of your community. And depending on how that shapes up, then that will play a part in how well we feel, how long we'll live healthy for, the illnesses that we experience, and how long we live for thereafter. So that's the theoretical position that we take relative to public health, and that's what we take into account in the design of the tool that I'll present. Now, how that theory plays out, well, you can see it here. Again, it's not unique to Scotland. But yeah, Thomas, is that?
I can hear you, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. I mean, in terms of how that plays out, this graph is not unique to Scotland. You can see this is a graph of people who die before the age of 75 per 100,000 people, least deprived 200 per 100,000, and most deprived is 4 times higher. And it's that previous slide that part explains why that statistic exists. That was Scotland's figures. The same plays out in Glasgow, our city, one of our cities in the west of Scotland, where you can jump on a train and knock 15 years off your life after just a few stops. And that applies to both males and females. And the same applies in even our capital city, and that was a headline in one of our national newspapers in May 2018. So That's the theoretical origins of the tool. The policy origins come from two main documents. One Good Places, Better Health for Scotland, which was keen to develop a neighbourhood standard, and that was written in 2008. But it was only in 2013 that the Scottish Government made a firm commitment to develop a place standard. And it's always very nice when policy turns into actual practice. And after 2.5 years of testing and retesting, we finally had that tool in place. But fortunately for us, we also had another couple of things happening in the background that assisted with its production and success, as I'll later explain. One was we already had a series of standards for community engagement that we worked to as a country. We also had a piece of legislation that came out 6 months before the Place Standard Tool's launch, which placed a legal requirement on our local government to engage with communities in order to shape local plans. So there was a requirement for local authorities to engage before putting their plans in place. Now, one of the important things is, of course, leadership, and certainly at a political level as well. So when the tool was launched, we had the buy-in from our cabinet within the Scottish Parliament. And so that was extremely helpful in having a high-level profile and political commitment to not only delivering on engagement with communities and designing local services and places, but also a recognition that the Place Standard Tool was one of those products that should be strongly considered in taking that work forward. So back to the theory, you can see there in terms of a political priority, this was a piece of legislation to engage with communities, and that legislation revolved around equality and power, which was extremely helpful in taking our work forward. So the Place Standard itself, it's a compass diagram. Many of us use this as an approach, especially when we're dealing with multi-dimensional concepts. It's free, it's easy to use. There's a booklet version. You can log onto the Place Standard website and use the electronic version for that as well. It really just facilitates effective conversation across businesses, public sector, community organisations, and communities themselves, to just talk about their place, but do it in a systematic way, and to deal with all elements that we consider have a direct impact on our health and well-being, and that shape equalities or inequalities in our society. Once that discussion is had, then we move on to looking at priorities and how we address those. But as you can see within the tool itself, what we try to do is make that conversation as simple as possible. So these are the 14 themes that we focus on.
John, let me interrupt. Some people are not probably cannot see the slides because they're calling in. So can you just do a visual description for people, that because we're seeing a slide with the 14 themes and then some questions to break them out. But if people can't see the themes, they'll be a little lost. So can you just briefly verbally, there's 14 of these dimensions. Can you name some of the key ones that you think are important, and then examples of the questions, just to make sure that people, if they can't see the slide, they can get us follow along.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Right, Thomas. Thanks for that. So, in terms of the tool itself, it's a compass diagram. It's split into 14 dimensions, and as Thomas has said, it would be helpful for me just to explain what they are. So they are fairly standard areas of what would make up of a place. So the first theme, for example, is called moving around. And the question in relation to that theme is, can I easily walk and cycle around using good quality routes? It's a very simple question, and it stimulates conversation. We don't ask about active travel or green networks, or it's not complicated language, because we want the discussion to be accessible as possible. Moving down the list, it deals with a whole number of other areas: public transport, traffic and parking, streets and spaces. And for each of those areas, there's a headline question. It also deals with areas such as facilities and amenities, work and local economy, housing, and then some of the social dimensions, such as how, around social interaction, identity and belonging, do we feel safe, the care and maintenance of the place we live in, and finally, the whole area of influence and sense of control. So the headline question for influence and sense of control is, do I feel able to participate in decisions and help change things for the better? So each of those 14 areas has a very simple question, and it stimulates a lot of discussion around each of those. And of course, you would have worked out already that you would work across those themes. You wouldn't necessarily deal with each one at a time. There is a clear interdependency between each of those. So in asking the question, can I easily walk around this place? Then you might get into a conversation around feeling safe. And that dimension asks very simply, do I feel safe? And so you create a real interactive conversation cutting across the themes, and it really generates a lot of really useful data. So in terms of the 14 themes that I've listed there, they match up with the theory behind what we would consider to influence our health and well-being. And because the place standard is very visual, and my apologies if some of you can't actually see the slides themselves, but the next slide really just explains how we go about using the scoring system. The place standard has a 1 to 7 score. The conversation generates a lot of useful information. And at the end, either you as an individual or as a group make a decision how you feel a certain dimension of place works. Whereas 0, it's not working very well at all. And 7, there's very little improvement that requires to be made. And you have the conversation around all 14 themes, and from that you have a range of scores in relation to each. Now, of course, it'll be virtually impossible if you're working as a group to get everyone to have overall consensus. And if you did have overall consensus, I would doubt very much that your engagement process is the correct one. There's clearly people of different ages, different populations. If you assess place at different times of the day or different times of the year, you're going to generate different scores. But you will have you will create a range of scores when you're having the conversation. And the next slide that I show is that very picture where the compass diagram can become quite messy with lots of different contributions. But in many ways, you can start generating a lot of priorities and different priorities. And you do eventually get to some consensus where interventions are proposed will meet the majority of the population, with a particular focus on our most vulnerable populations and their needs being met. The next slide really just shows what a completed place standard tool would look like, and the diversity of what works well and what doesn't work so well within a place. This particular picture shows that the influence and sense of control scores particularly low. That is quite common. And I'll show you a slide of work in Copenhagen where it was quite the opposite. And you might be quite surprised in terms of the population that we're working with in that instance. So you can apply different methodologies as with any engagement, one-to-ones, workshops. We use online surveys as well, especially within our rural areas where it's less possible to get groups of people together, especially our highland and island communities. And in terms of what it could be used for, it really can be used for a whole range of purposes. Any intervention that is concerned with the places that people live in, the place standard tool would have a part to play. And the starting point could be anything from designing cycle networks to looking at the local economy, to looking at increasing engagement and decision making at a local level. So basically, you collect to the evidence, you generate what the priorities are, you have conversation around what would be the actions that would address those priorities, and then they feed into the various plans and strategies, or indeed business plans for investment. So really it's focusing on increasing information and trying to generate the best informed investment in our places within our communities. Now, the tool has been evaluated in terms of the process, and that in turn has been used to shape our learning programs that we roll out across the country and now further afield. And even as early as 2017, only 18 months after launch, we won the Royal Town Planning Institute for Excellence in Planning for Wellbeing, and that award was received in London in the summer of 2017. So that was recognised by town planners and planning experts across the whole of the UK, and we're extremely pleased to have received that. And it really helped with the conversation and taking the work forward. The main headline in terms of application is it keeps on continuing to grow in terms of where it's applied, what it's used for, and what it's informing in terms of local and national decision making. The next slide I put up just sort of breaks down some of the things it's used within Scotland. These are November 2018 figures, but the main application is around local development plans in terms of shaping physical place within communities. What we call locality plans, and that's the community perspective within our most vulnerable socioeconomic areas within Scotland. And what's now emerging as well as part of the new legislation for planning in Scotland is the place standard tool is used for the development of local place plan. And the figures in 2018, about a fifth of all applications were used for that purpose. I'll skip through the next one. The next slide just highlights the fact there's lots of case studies that you can tap into, and they provide case studies at different scale, at settlement, at neighbourhood, a particular site. So again, if you're wanting to consider the place standard tool, there's case studies you can draw upon to learn from the lessons for its application at different scale. One area around of spread and how it can engage with large numbers of people was a case study that was presented by Julie Robertson, who's a planning officer in Dundee City Council. I don't know if you're familiar with Dundee as a city. It's on the east coast of Scotland. It's famous for lots of cake or jam or jute technology. I suppose if I'm trying to think of, especially given some of your backgrounds and stuff, the birthplace of grand auto theft, if that helps at all. The local university has got a bit of a games hub, and that was one of its very early inventions around gaming. But here you can see a map of a spread of the city, and it's got circles that cover where a traditional method of engagement has engaged to inform what we call is a main issues report. The main issues report basically collects all the ideas from local people to inform their local city plan. The spread was okay, but those of you who would be familiar with Dundee, a lot of the affluent areas engaged and less affluent areas didn't engage. The next slide, though, shows a picture of when the place standard tool was used with the same level of resource, and we were probably 4 to 5 times the amount of coverage and a significant amount of engagement and input from communities who tend not to engage in that process. So that was an excellent piece of learning in terms of increased engagement using this particular tool. If you like your case studies on film, please just type in place standard in the YouTube and you'll get a number of subtitled videos to learn from. But what I wanted to just quickly share with you was how we go about ensuring that its delivery is consistent across the whole of Scotland. I won't go into the detail, but one of the things I want to just highlight is that it is led by the Chief Architect in Scotland. I chair the group that's responsible for delivering the operational plan. But we've also been able to identify a place standard lead within each local government area that they just take on as part of their job. And we've also got an alliance of practitioners, very similar to the alliances that you will have, to ensure that we identify, capture, and share best practice. So a blend of governance, leadership, and a whole series of mechanisms to ensure that improvement is central to how we deliver on a programme. I'll just skip through the next couple of slides because I'm aware of time and having to provide a little bit more time just to explain what the slides are looking like. But the next part of the story is just really how it moved from Scotland to across Europe. And again, it was fortuitous. It was a meeting I had in Slovenia and an invitation to present at the Who Summer School. And I said I've got this new product that's just come out, and Who Summer School might be interested in it. They were. I wasn't aware that a few months later I'd been invited to Budapest to present again. And within a year, we had a masterclass for the WHO, the World Health Organization, European Healthy Cities Network. And you'll see, for those of you who can see the slides, we had our Cabinet Secretary for Health, our focal point lead for WHO in Europe for Healthy Cities, the Mayor of Edinburgh, and various other senior leads, and a whole number of people from across Europe as well joined that masterclass. It was a 2-day masterclass, and from there it's just really taken off in terms of rollout. Firstly, within our UK cities, Belfast in Northern Ireland was one of the first to bring in its leaders to learn how to use the tool and embed it into decision making within the city. Carlisle in the north of England again brought in politicians and executive leaders to see how it could shape its democratic process in deciding how to invest monies within the city. Carlisle have since then raised about £400,000 to invest in the use of the tool across the area. Denmark was one of the first European cities to adopt it, and we used a chalkboard to go out in the streets and engage with, mainly in this particular case, our homeless communities. And as I said earlier, this was one of the communities that scored the highest in terms of sense of control and been able to have the ability to make choices of how they live their lives and make decisions about how they do that. Denmark is now.
John, I'm gonna. Can I interrupt? I'm conscious of the time because I want to open up. I wonder if we can pull from this international trend that you're talking about and just open up a discussion with the folks on the call. I want to make sure that we have a little time to break this out a little bit. Would you be okay to kind of transition to a discussion level at this point? I know you probably have a few more slides in here, but...
Well, what I'll do, Thomas, if you don't mind, I'll whiz through this very quickly because what I wanted to show you that whilst we've got all these different deliveries happening within Latvia, Macedonia, Turkey, the list just goes on and on. It was just really to highlight that moving forward, there's a few things that are going to be happening. And one is because of the picture that I've put up here is how each of the dimensions align with the Sustainable Development Goals.
Yeah.
WHO recognise that. And as a consequence of that, I'll be in Copenhagen in March to work at an accredited version of the toolkit for WHO. And also there's a potential of a new organisation hosting a collaborating centre in place for the World Health Organization also. So it's just really to say that these various applications in individual countries have now come to a point where the World Health Organization feels that this is a toolkit that could go out globally, and they as an organization would accredit that and support its rollout. So I'll leave it there. And
that's great. Yeah, that's the great segue to us. And how do we roll it? How might people use this here in the United States or around the world? If you can navigate back to at least one of the slides that shows the measure and the 14 dimensions, so we can refer back to that. Any of the ones that kind of clearly list that. But so I want to just open it up here. I mean, this is a great summary of an innovative measure started locally in Scotland, has been now rolled out and kind of validated across the UK. Yeah, that's a great slide there. And the content, the methodology, the accessibility are all very positive and strong in this. And now it's essentially becoming a world standard. And I think the early experience is that this translates well to communities across. And John didn't say it, but I see this has been translated into other languages, so it does translate well, literally. And so that's great. And it plays very much, to our health pyramid idea in the thriving communities, that we have basic determinants of health, and then we have interest groups and stakeholders. And it's then that we bring in technologies to see how they might help. So we can use this model for the place standard in this case too. The technology doesn't come in first; it comes in later when we identify what are the goals around natural spaces, or what are the goals around social interaction, or what are the goals about identity and belonging. I can say, John, that our elder folks in DC are picked up your measure, and they're actually using it, I think, today at a presentation, and they're very excited about it. So,
great.
In terms of elders in the community in Washington DC, both thriving elders and elders might have limitations. This is sounding like it's a very helpful measure for them. But I want to open this up to folks that either have specific questions for John. Or specific, observations or extensions, just to see where this might be landing for people. Does anyone want to get a start on a discussion? Any topics or questions?
Hi, John. This is Kelsey. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, if you can speak a little louder, that would be good.
Okay, perfect. This tool is so fascinating. I'm so glad that you are able to come onto this call and share it with us. I'm sorry, I don't remember from actually trying to take it myself, but are there places where you guys are collecting demographic information so you can see how feelings of safety or belonging might differ between different race and ethnicity groups, different age groups, different income groups, so that you can kind of help to target interventions?
Yes, so the when completing the online form, the people will provide that information if they want to do so. But the other thing that we would encourage in terms of its application is that in order to get a real sense of how a place works, that we would proactively seek that the project includes all aspects of the population in terms of age, disability, sensory impairment, ethnicity, to really get a full picture of what people think about their place, what works well, and what improvements should be made. But yes, we do, the data is collected and reported on, but at the same time, as a matter of good practice, we would encourage people who use it to actively seek out contributions from a representative group.
Mm-hmm. But you can track the trends. You can, there's some way maybe to use this as a database where you can track the trends and just say, by demographic, what's the relative score on identity or a housing, I assume.
Yes, yeah. I mean, you can break down the figures, and so if it's boys of a certain age, if it's older females, and you can subdivide that further down to ethnicity. and
Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
So yes, I mean you can play with the figures as much as you want, and clearly if you wanted to add in some supplementary questions to really even fine tune that data further, you can do that also.
Mhm. That's great. Other questions, comments, observations?
Hi, John.
Hi,
This is
this
Monica. I'm curious about a couple of things. First of all, excellent starting point, and I appreciate that question that Kelsey asked. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about who owns the data once someone's put it into the survey, whether or not it's publicly available, and anything that you specifically do around data privacy.
Okay, so yeah, the laws that apply within the UK will are integral in terms of how we manage that data. We are probably only working with the first 3 digits within a postcode to decide roughly where the location is, where that person is living, but it doesn't go any further than that. The data sits within the server and Scottish Government. We have had discussions with the chief planner around how we use that data at scale to make some decisions. I'm not 100% supportive of that, and certainly not being used in isolation with other data. So there's a whole number of other data streams that we use within Scotland that would give more accurate data in terms of the demographic profile of a place, and really some of the key characteristics of that place. What this provides is another set of data and some real up-to-date information around the quality of a place. So my view would tend to be, when we're making decisions around improvements of a certain locality or region, that we bring together various fields of information to inform those decisions, and the data that's generated through this tool would be one of those. So yeah, the data's there. It's protected. We don't publish it as a large scale data set for the whole of the country. Certainly don't make comparisons across communities. But it's mainly used by the people who have commissioned the projects to use the data to inform their local decision making.
So that seems like an interesting future how would this interact with companies or people that are making products or apps? Is it, does it have more of an open source component? I mean, it's a little more of a technical future discussion. But so the data is essentially owned by, at this point, if I do a measure on this place standard site, then the data lives in Scotland and it's owned by the Scottish government, essentially.
Well, it's sitting in there just now. However, in saying that, some people have taken the design of the tool and used it into other forms of data collection. So you can still ask the same questions, you can still have the same prompt questions underneath each of the headlines, and you can just put it into another survey, online survey, and people can complete it that way, and you would obviously own that data.
I see. The content can be transported to any number of platforms.
Yes, so when you're going online, you could just you could just make up your own personal ID, and so all that data goes to you. I mean, you'll see that data you collect.
Mm-hmm.
I think, one of the things that I always say to people is that I could speak, and my colleagues could speak for days around this, but really the best way of learning is probably just use it.
Mm-hmm.
And be it the PDF downloaded copy or using the online version. And what I never got a chance to say is the fact we're developing an improved version of the tool, which will be available in the next few months. And we'll also have a children's version, a young person's version. And for planners, designers, architects, there will be a design version toolkit as well. But they'll all be available in the summer of this year. So again, while some of the language here is really, really accessible for communities, from a professional perspective, they may want to use, in search of a better word, a sort of advanced version of the toolkit. But
That's
Hi,
great.
I have a question.
Yeah.
This is Sushmita.
Yes.
So thank you, John, for this wonderful presentation. It's so good to see a tool like this, bringing together different things in one place, on one page, essentially. I was just asking, so far this has been rolled out in different countries in Europe, right? Has it
Yes.
gone to any other continents?
Whilst most of the work has been done in Europe, and that's where I've visited and delivered a series of workshops. There are individual emails that I respond to, so I've provided some advice for work in New Zealand with a housing association, some townships in South Africa. I did get an email from
Thank you.
the specific office for WHO as well, just a couple of weeks ago. And I've also presented to networks in Canada. So, in terms of examples of delivery, they're all from Europe so far.
Mm-hmm.
But this is the nature of these conversations. It would be great to generate case studies from elsewhere.
It sounds like the trend is by maybe a year from now, this is going to be way more international if it's going to be taken up by the WHO.
Yes.
So we're kind of right on the ground floor of this, it seems like, which is great.
Definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, we've got a few more minutes. Other thoughts or questions here from the group?
I'm from Calcutta. I was on the call in the telephone. I would like to see the slides. Is there any way I can be sent the slides on my email or something so that I can have a better understanding of the project?
Yeah, of course. I'm be more than delighted to share the slides, and I can provide perhaps a couple of other links to articles that will provide an explanation as well. I don't have any speaker's notes.
Mm-hmm.
I just so you'll just have the slides as they are, but I'll provide other links that will hopefully provide some narrative to support.
Right. Thank you so much.
Each of the slides.
Yeah, John, if you could send me, I've got the information you've already sent, but whatever else, I'll put it out, to our list, and then
right.
Put some links to it on our Google Docs. Yes, so definitely.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, great.
And the Place Standard website is pretty helpful. Just the website itself is is full of information. Nice, I found.
This is great. This is Stan. Quick comment.
Yeah.
We've had some Kaiser people on the call, and Kaiser did a lot of work around placemaking, and published a lot of the research that said placemaking is more important than genetic. Zip code's more important than genetic code, and worked with the U.S. version of the public placemaking standard. I can send you along that research, but that's a really good reference, and we do a lot of work with Kaiser potentially.
That would be really helpful. Thank you very much.
Yeah. This is Kamal Rogers. If you could send that would be good. I'd like to look at that too. Definitely for communities of color, that kind of information would be very valuable. This is a very good tool. I really appreciate your presentation. Thank you.
Yeah. So Kaiser is a healthcare organization here. So they're trying to get ahead of health and public health. Looking ahead here in Portland, we have our yearly meeting will be coming up in October. The Global Tech Jam, which is being renamed the Techlandia, is the new Techlandia Smart Communities meeting. That's going to be in October. In advance in here in the next several months, I hope that we can make some more connections with the Place Standard and just place making, as Stan says. I think that's just a general theme here that intersects with this so-called smart cities movement is the quality of the place and the placemaking activities. And so again, our goals are to use what we say is high tech, low tech, and no tech approaches. So yes, we might use high tech, technological apps and things like that, but we want to make sure we're not forgetting lower tech, human human connections and just person to person connections. So I think the place standard really does allow moving across high tech, low tech, no tech dimension really well. We were just at 10 o'clock. I can stay on the call a little longer if anyone wants to linger and chat. But if people need to go, I just want to recognize that.
I did put the reference in the chat line, and I emailed it to you, Thomas, for your future reference.
All right. Yeah. As soon as I hear back from John about anything else he wants to share or some slides, I'll fire off a follow up to our list, our group, and then looking ahead, we're going to be doing our monthly call in February. We have got some special interest groups working on air quality and elders, and we're going to try to get some more networking around those two issues. And just if you're interested in this development of this particular group, meeting and speaking with the folks in Washington, D.C. about the Global Cities Team Challenge in general and how we can get this thriving group recognized officially as what we call a super cluster. It's potential that we might need to slightly rebrand ourselves to fit in with the technological language of the other superclusters. So we've been encouraged to consider ourselves a human factors group, broadly human factors. So that would better play well with the public safety and data security and transportation verticals in the Global Cities Team Challenge. So I'm going to elicit people's thoughts on, potentially reframing this as a human factors and well-being group with the description that our goals are thriving communities, because I do want to get this group officially recognized, in the GCTC website and have more of a true presence. So there's some formative discussions to have here in the next few months about the group itself and how we can keep growing and get recognition in Washington at the governmental level. But I'm gonna call an official stop to this call now, and thank you very much. And I'll linger here for a few minutes if anyone wants to stick around to chat or have any other follow-up questions. So thank you all very much. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much indeed, Thomas.
Thanks, John. I really appreciate it.
I had a question, actually. I was curious if any of those 14 themes directly relate to environmental quality, or if somehow this place standard correlates with environmental quality within communities, such as air quality or water, access to clean water and recycling and compost and stuff like that.
Yeah, is this Monica?
This is Shania.
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. I'm
still on the line, Thomas, as well, so I'm happy to
yeah.
Please go ahead.
I was going to try to share my screen, but John, I've asked John similar questions about, say, arts and culture. That was another area of mine. Like, where does that fit? And they've been trying to take a less specific path. But John, how would you answer that question around sustainability and recycling and compost and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll share the screen again, and hopefully that works. And so you've got these themes. I mean, it does, and in terms of air quality, for example, we would tend not to have a conversation asking people, what do you think of the air quality? But we would talk about things that are responsible for generating good, clean air and that generates poor air. So we'd have conversations around public transport and traffic and how streets and spaces are designed, and obviously selection of mode of transport. A lot of stuff around recycling, for example, would sit under facilities and communities. So what we tend to do is, and what's not in the slide is a series of prompt questions. So even about clean water, that wasn't something that we didn't put in here. We've probably just taken it for granted when it came from Scotland. We've got lots of water and the water quality is very good. But when I was doing work across in North Macedonia, clean water was a big thing. And so what we want to do with the new tool is allow people to add their own prompt questions depending on context. So under facilities and amenities, access to clean water could be one of the prompt questions. Whether you need a prompt or not to have a conversation around that is another thing, but we would certainly encourage people to have that conversation. So what I'm keen to do is make sure that in reviewing the tool, that there's nothing that cannot be accommodated under these 14 areas. If it cannot be accommodated, then we'll have to think about the team. But just now, I'm fairly confident they do cover most of the areas that we'd be concerned with. Does that help?
No, yeah, it definitely does. Because I think, certain communities, especially within the US, they have a lack of accessibility to these sorts of amenities. So I'm sure it's different, country to country. But it's, I did actually start taking the place standard and I didn't finish it, but I did notice there is a place to leave comments. So that might be kind of where you would put that in, right? Is that correct?
Yes, yeah. I mean, the score itself is just really the result of generating lots and lots of information from various people at different times of the day or different times of the week. But as an individual scoring, yes, I mean, you'd make a call on an individual score based on what you think around a particular theme. But yeah, you're right, it will vary across the country, state to state.
Yeah, I think there's a creative tension between just when I first had this measure, I was looking for things that weren't in it, and then I really had to realize this is just a general sense for a broad range of people how they feel about their place, and so it seems to me we can use this measure in some interesting ways. Like again, with our thriving group, we've got a dimension on vibrant arts and culture because I believe that's a really key part of a thriving community. And there isn't necessarily an arts and culture piece in here, but it leads to interesting studies where if I do create more vibrant arts and culture experiences in a community, will it then translate into changes in people's scores on this measure? In the sense of in the sense of identity and belonging, social interactions, amenities, recreation. So we can sort of experiment, I think, if I do build a park, for example, how does that impact streets, traffic, natural spaces? If I do create a community arts festival, for example, as each town has its own interests and its own history, each town can have obviously Scotland has tons of arts and culture traditions, as those are strengthened in a community, how does that in fact raise the score, raise the sense of place, make it a better place. Yeah. So I think it's really interesting, and if I had better recycling or composting, how does that affect people's general quality of life? I think it's really interesting to think about.
Yeah, I mean, even just selecting that entry point as a festival in the centre of a town, and thinking of how would that impact on a place, and how would you create a great festival taking into account all of these themes? You would be able to have a conversation in relation to each theme that would input to the design of that festival.
Yes.
There's lots of places that have started from a single point, and they quickly realise that they have to take everything into account in order for them to make a very sound judgment on their investment. If it's a town centre development, they've quickly realised that in order for that town to work well, we have to go beyond the town's boundaries and take in these other aspects.
Yeah.
We want people to come in and out of the town, but we don't want it to be clogged with traffic, then we have to think of what are the alternatives to move people and goods in and out of our town centre without it damaging air quality, people feeling safe, etc., etc.
Yeah. I mean, a story that I shared on one of our updates was from Detroit, city of Detroit in the United States. There was an interesting news story where, they had a free tree program where they were giving residents trees that they could plant on their property, and it wasn't going over really well. And then someone investigated, and they found somebody that people weren't asked if they wanted them. They weren't asked if they wanted a tree program, and so it speaks to that influence and sense of control. So I could imagine redoing that, where we actually looked at a community, had them do the place standard, see what they thought of their community. And then I said, well, if I added a free tree program, would that actually improve your place standard score? Then we would get into something, so I think this could be used very proactively.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If they could influence the species of the tree, that might score well in the influence and sense of control.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, they probably just viewed it as extra work, and they didn't ask for that extra work.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Or maybe they say, well, I'm not feeling safe, or I don't have public transport, so let's save the tree and let's work on something else. So again, it's the priority.
Yes.
It's the priority, and it's the bias or the blind spot that we think our priorities are the same as others. Yeah. This is great. I appreciate people sticking around. I know, John, you've got some things you've got to do, and I've got to move on.
I've got enough. If people, I've got another 5 minutes. If people have got any final questions, I'll probably have to leave about quarter past 10.
Sure. Yeah. Anybody else have anything they wanted to share before we wrap up? All right. Well, listen, thanks again, John. This is really great. I think, a lot of people wanted to be on this call that couldn't as well. So I want to get those slides shared. And I look forward to keep in contact with you, and hopefully get myself over on a visit over to Scotland.
Yeah, that would be great, Thomas. Yeah, I'll do that. I'll share the slides, a couple of links that you may already have, and please, and also my contact details for people to get in touch with.
Yeah.
Engage with me directly. I might have some more news to share. I'm actually in Portugal next week, working with city architects for cities in Europe. So hopefully some additional notes to share once I get around to getting that to you.
Excellent. All right. Well, thanks again, everyone. I'm gonna wrap up our call, but you all have great days and